Welcome back to U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, the one host, and there is Christoph, the other host. Hey, Christoph.
Hey, Dale, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
So, last time we had started our rundown of the Spanish-American War. So, we're going to finish that hopefully today and maybe get into the battles.
Cool.
So, you ready to get underway?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
All right. So, the last time, I believe, war were declared.
Yes.
Yes. So, let's jump over to the Pacific Theater, specifically the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
So, Spanish have ruled it for 300 years.
It was that long.
A very long time, yeah. I mean, we just celebrated our 248th birthday. So they developed from a small overseas colony governed by the Viceroyalty of New Spain to a land with modern elements in the cities.
Okay.
They had a Spanish-speaking middle class, which were mostly educated in the liberal ideas coming from Europe. Among these guys was the Filipino national hero, Jose Rizal. And he demanded larger reforms from the Spanish authorities. This eventually led to the Philippine Revolution against Spanish colonial rule. So the first battle between the American and Spanish forces was at Manila Bay. This was May 1st when Commodore George Dewey, who commanded the U.S. Navy's Asiatic Squadron from the USS Olympia, defeated a Spanish squadron under Admiral Patricio Montojo in just a couple of hours.
Wow.
And Dewey's men only suffered 9 wounded.
What a lopsided battle. That's amazing.
Yeah, we'll be going deep into this battle later. So the German seized Tsingtao in 1897. This left Dewey's squadron as the only naval force in the Far East without a base of its own.
Oh.
So, of course, this meant coal and ammunition problems. But even with these problems, the Asiatic Squadron didn't only destroy the Spanish fleet, but also just took Manila, the harbor of Manila.
Wow.
So after this, Manila Bay was filled with warships from Britain, Germany, France, and Japan. Everybody just moved right in.
That's interesting.
The German fleet had 8 ships, and they said they were in the Philippine waters to protect German interests. They cut in front of American ships, and they refused to salute the U.S. flag, which was against customs of naval courtesy.
Can you elaborate on that? Because when you started that sentence, I'm like, yeah, why would a German salute an American flag? But what is the convention, the maritime convention?
Well, when you're visiting a foreign port, you show them respect.
And it's usually done via salute?
Yeah. In the military way.
Was Germany, I don't know if you know this, did they do this often at foreign ports? Or was it this particular circumstance where they were just like, America?
No, the German people at this time had a very big chip on their shoulder. Because
they were pretty new as a country, right?
Yeah, well, the whole 30-year war thing where everybody was fighting their wars on German soil, destroying and ravaging Germany, that tends to put a huge chip on your shoulder.
I could see that, yes.
So, yeah, that is, you know, why I think that they were the way they were up until, World War II.
Yeah.
If any of our German listeners want to correct us, please do, because
Yes. We're here to learn together.
But they were also taking soundings of the harbor and landing supplies for the Spanish who were under siege.
So the Germans were supplying the Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they were eager to take advantage of whatever opportunities that they could.
Mm-hmm.
So the Americans were like, we're going to call your bluff. You keep this up, we're going to fight you.
Oh, wow.
And the Germans were like, okay, you got us. We're backing down. We're done. JK.
I can see that if they're having a war on their own soil for 30 years, the last thing they want to do is get into an unnecessary conflict.
Well, see, the Germans, they expected a confrontation in the Philippines to end with the Americans defeated.
Right.
So they were there to sort through what was left over.
You had to mop up a little bit.
Yeah, but they were being very, very dumb about it.
Yeah. They do some moves that are very surprising sometimes. At least the German officials through history, I'm like, wow, why would you... Like the Zimmerman note in World War I, they're like, yeah, of course we did that. Why wouldn't we? Like, why would you admit that? Anyway.
Yeah, or, trying to wipe out an entire race.
Yeah. That seems like a distraction if you're also trying to win a war. You know what I mean? Two huge efforts. Both not good.
No, not at all. So Commodore Dewey, he transported Emilio Aguinaldo, who was a Filipino leader who had led rebellions against Spanish rule in the Philippines in 1896. They took him back home from exile in Hong Kong, and they wanted to use him to rally more Filipinos against the Spanish colonial government. And by June, U.S. and Filipino forces had taken control of most of the islands.
Wow.
Except for the walled city of Intramuros.
I'm surprised walled cities are still effective this late in the game. You know what I mean? 1898 still seems like a long time ago, but walled cities weren't as commonplace after a while.
This is on the cusp of when the mindset of warfare changed.
That's true.
This was late in the game. Because the mindset of warfare changed during World War I.
That's absolutely true, yes. Well, I would say even the U.S. Civil War was a big inflection point because it was this combination of a blend of like the classical strategy, but combined with a lot of modern. You see landmines, you see submarines, you see ironclads, you see things that are just not conventional at all.
Right.
And,
that was the start of the change. World War I was
right
completely from where you have tertios marching at each other to when you're digging into the earth with trench warfare.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. It's cool that we're in this period to examine the contrast.
Absolutely. So on June 12th, Aguinaldo proclaimed Filipino independence.
They copied that from us. I'm just saying.
Probably. I mean, we were there helping them.
Yeah, that's true.
So we're going to fast forward to August 13th. The American commanders were unaware that a ceasefire had been signed between Spain and the U.S. on the 12th. So that is when the American forces captured the city of Manila from the Spanish in the Battle of Manila. This marked the end of the Filipino-American collaboration because this prevented Filipino forces from entering the captured city And this really ticked off the Filipinos.
Why would it prevent the Filipinos from entering the captured city? So Americans capture Manila from the Philippines, which is under the control of the Spanish Empire. We have it, we're collaborating with them, but then we sign a ceasefire with Spain. I guess, was that a condition of the ceasefire? It's like, hey, you can't collaborate with them anymore? I mean, I would imagine. It's just a weird side effect.
Well,
but yes, I would also be pissed.
the Americans take it and they're like, this is ours right now. Stay out.
Yeah. As a Filipino, I'd be like, hey, we're fighting we've been occupied for 300 years by the Spanish. We're finally getting freedom. Oh, no, wait, now it's somebody else in charge. That would be irritating.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's why it's not on my list, because that is a land battle. Haha. Let's see. So this actually later led to the Philippine-American War, which would actually be more deadly and costly than the Spanish-American War.
That's interesting. I know that the totality of the Spanish-American War was fairly short, like shorter than most conflicts we read about or talk about. So that's not totally surprising, and I think just from a historical context perspective, Spain has been losing a lot of its former holdings for a while now.
Well, every country has. This is when colonial rule took a downturn.
Right. That's true. By this point, India is independent, I believe. Oh, no, wait. Nope.
No.
Not yet.
No, that doesn't happen until after World War II.
Yeah, well, Mexico for sure.
Yeah, Mexico has their independence by now.
And then, I need to go back through my mental timeline of when people decided to be free.
I would think from birth,
where they could.
Or not.
True. But I know like a lot of African countries even that were occupied by colonizers, they weren't free until like the 50s and 60s, 1960s. So
yeah, Hong Kong wasn't released until the 90s.
97? Yeah.
So, I mean, this is when it started.
No, you're right. I got you. I think America lit the candle, and then everybody's like, hey.
Oh, yeah, no. America was the downfall of colonial rules.
Right.
Well, yeah, we'll be talking about the Philippine-American War later.
Right.
It got its own conflict coverage.
I'd be curious to see how that unfolds. You don't hear that much about it relative to the Spanish-American War, for example, but yeah, we'll get into it.
Yeah, once I study for it.
That's good.
Let's see. The U.S. sent a force of around 11,000 ground troops into the Philippines.
Whoa.
And armed conflict broke out between U.S. forces and Filipino forces when the U.S. troops began to take the place of Spanish control in the country after the end of the war. This is the Philippine-American War.
I see.
So let's move over to Guam. Guam, which is really not that far from the Philippines. On June 20th, a U.S. fleet commanded by Captain Henry Glass, consisting of the armored cruiser USS Charleston and 3 transports carrying troops to the Philippines, entered Guam's Apra Harbor. Captain Glass had sealed orders, and he opened them, and he got instructions. Why am I whistling when I said instructions?
Maybe that's how Captain Glass sounded, and you're trying to make it authentic.
No, that would be the sound of breaking glass.
Oh. Well, I'm not going to help you there.
Right.
I treasure the glass around me.
Yes. So he read his instructions, telling him to proceed to Guam and take it.
This is pretty... So is Guam a Spanish-controlled territory at this point? And if so, this seems to be after the agreed-upon ceasefire. So I have a lot of questions about why we're doing this.
It is before the ceasefire by 2 months. And yes, the Spanish held Guam.
Well, then that makes sense.
Yes. So Charleston fired a few cannon rounds at Fort Santa Cruz, and the fort did not respond because the two local officials did not know that war had been declared and thought that the cannon fire was a salute.
Did we miss that badly? But I mean, if you're going to err one side or the other, that's not necessarily bad.
I mean, it
You know
could
what
have
I mean?
been warning shots.
Right. And it's like, why would we fire back? They're just, hey, salute, thank you very much.
The two officials came out to the Charleston to apologize for their inability to return the salute. Glass then informs them that the U.S. and Spain were at war.
That is a hilarious way to find out you're at war.
Right?
Just this remote governor of this small island in a large empire, and it's like, oh, we're so sorry. Couldn't return the salute. We're trying to be diplomatic here. No, we're at war with you. Oh, I'm highly embarrassed.
Yes, we're going to go back to shore now. Thank you.
Right?
So the next day, Captain Glass sends Lieutenant William Bruenschrader to meet the Spanish governor to arrange the surrender of the island and the Spanish garrison there. Some 54 Spanish infantry were captured and transported to the Philippines as POWs. 2 whole shots were fired, and the island is ours.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's probably the most decisive victory we've talked about on this podcast, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, hey, nobody was hurt on either
Nobody
side.
was hurt?
That's awesome.
And ammunition was really conserved. You kind of want it all to go that way, but, you know, you understand how conflict goes.
Yeah. So the U.S. did not leave any forces on Guam. There was only one U.S. citizen on the island, a guy named Frank Portshot, and he told the captain that he would look after things until U.S. forces returned.
Hey, Frank, can you handle it? Yup.
Well, I mean, the Spanish were removed from the island, so the only people there were the people of Guam.
Natives. Yeah, well.
The people who were actually supposed to be in charge of the island.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. It's like, hey, do you think Frank could take on 20, I don't know what the citizens of Guam would be called. The Guamanians? I don't know. But those guys, if they wanted to assert control, I don't think Frank could do a whole lot about it.
Probably not, but Frank is probably a civilian, so he probably has, friendly relations with the Guanonians.
That's true. Yes, Guanonians. I like...
Guy, people, if you're from Guam, let us know what we're supposed to call you.
Oh, but if they do that, we can't wildly guess and really exercise our creativity. The Guamese sounds so pedestrian. I don't think that's it.
Yeah.
I like that. Let's not insult our listener base. So yes, what Dale said, you're from Guam, let us know.
Yeah, we just lost everybody from Guam that listens.
We'll win them back through our hearty endorsement of Guam.
And by moving on to the Caribbean theater. All right. So, Cuba. Mm-hmm. Theodore Roosevelt, he was very excited about intervention in Cuba, both for the Cuban people and to promote the Monroe Doctrine. And the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he placed the Navy on a wartime footing and prepared Dewey's Asiatic Squadron for battle, while working with Leonard Wood in convincing the Army to raise an all-volunteer regiment. This was to be the first U.S. volunteer cavalry. He was given command of the regiment, and it became known as the Rough Riders.
Oh, yeah. That's a rad name, if you're going to come up with a cavalry company name.
Yeah. I wonder if they call them that because it was so rough on their behinds.
I think that's implied. Like, if you're a rider, boy, that's just happening.
So the Americans planned to capture the city of Santiago de Cuba and to destroy the Legionnaires' army and Cervera's fleet. So to reach Santiago, they had to pass through a concentrated Spanish defense in the San Juan Hills and in a small town named El Caney. The American forces were aided in Cuba by pro-independence rebels led by General Calixto Garcia.
Ooh, Calixto. That's a cool name.
Yeah. So from June 22nd to the 24th, the U.S. 5 Corps under General William R. Shafter landed at Daiquiri and Siboney, which is east of Santiago, and established a American forward operating base. A contingent of Spanish troops, having already fought skirmish with Americans on June 23rd, they retired to their lately entrenched positions at Las Guasimas.
That sounds right.
Yeah, sure.
You know, if it's correct, you're honoring them. If it's incorrect, we're fostering communication with listeners to have them help us so we can honor them in the future. So it's a win-win.
Right after the tears are done, yes.
Well, of joy, I hope. We get to contact them!
So a advance guard of U.S. forces under former Confederate General Joseph Wheeler ignored the Cuban scouting parties and ordered his men to proceed with caution.
I have a question.
I'm sorry, no. He ignored Cuban scouting parties and his orders to proceed with caution.
Oh, I see. So I know that when the Confederacy was defeated at the end of the Civil War, there was some legislation that barred leaders from becoming elected officials, governors, senators, etc. I thought something like that was done in the military, where if you were a Confederate general, for example, you were not going to be a U.S. general.
It's true. This guy, for some reason, was exempt.
That's interesting. I wonder if it was just availability or, for example, Roosevelt's Rough Riders. I think that was a volunteer corps, right? Like he signed up. So it could be because it was a volunteer group that this, I don't know. That's
Possibly,
interesting.
But he also served with the U.S. Congress, too, before that.
He may have gotten some exemption then, because that generally that was not allowed.
No. But yeah, so he was special.
Cool. It's nice to find special people now and then.
Yeah. So they caught up and engaged the Spanish rearguard of around 2,000, led by a guy named General Antero Rubin, who pretty much ambushed the Americans.
Oh.
This was the Battle of Las Guasimas on June 24th. This ended in favor of the Spanish, and they continued with their planned retreat to Santiago. At this time, the U.S. Army employed Civil War-era skirmishers at the head of their advancing columns. 3 of the 4 U.S. soldiers who had volunteered to act as skirmishers were walking point and were killed. These included Hamilton Fish II, who was the grandson of Hamilton Fish, the Secretary of State under Ulysses S. Grant.
Wow.
Captain Island Capron, who Theodore Roosevelt would describe as one of the finest natural leaders and soldiers he had ever met.
That's quite a compliment.
Yeah. The only guy to survive was a Native American from the Pawnee tribe, a guy named Tom Isbell. He was wounded 7 times, but survived.
That's a tough dude.
Yes, so this battle showed the U.S. that quick-thinking American soldiers would not stick to the old linear Civil War tactics. And this did not work effectively against Spanish troops, who had learned the art of cover and concealment from their own fight with Cuban insurgents.
That's interesting how those earlier fights influence and train you in preparation for these future fights. I mean, we did the same thing with the British, and they did not expect those strategies.
Yeah. So the Americans advanced by rushes and stayed in the weeds so that they were largely invisible to the Spaniards, who used untargeted volley fire to try to mask their fire against the Americans. So, somebody's going to get hit, no matter what. But this technique was mostly a waste of bullets, as the Americans learned to duck as soon as they heard the Spanish word fire.
That's funny.
Yeah. Now, the Spanish they were equipped with smokeless powder arms, and that helped them to hide their positions while they fired. And the Rough Riders also used smokeless ammunition.
I imagine that was more expensive.
Probably.
Wanted to throw a non sequitur in there. Continue.
I mean, it's a different type of gunpowder. Instead of using black powder was very smoky.
Right.
I mean, smokeless powder still has smoke, but it's not anywhere close to the big field of black smoke that would come out. But, I mean, when you fire in a volley, at least there's a smoke screen.
Right, exactly. So that kind of gives some cover, but at the same time, it's like you're still highlighting this is exactly where we are.
Yeah, but at that point in time, you're also standing shoulder to shoulder anyway, so.
Right.
So on July 1st, a combined force of about 15,000 American troops, which included all four of the Army's colored regiments, attacked the 1,270 entrenched Spaniards in a Civil War-style frontal assault at the Battle of El Caney and the Battle of San Juan Hill. More than 200 U.S. soldiers were killed and close to 1,200 wounded.
Ooh.
Because at this time, the Spanish were able to put a high rate of fire downrange, because they were using the Remington rolling block rifles.
This might be an odd thought, but I wonder if Remington said, wow, this is a great test case of how superior our firearm is. Do you think they use this in any kind of advertising? And like, the best gun in this battle? Probably not. Did hurt a lot of Americans, so probably not.
Yeah, probably. If the Americans were using it in that capacity, they would. But
that's true.
No.
Yeah, probably. That's bad marketing. They probably knew that even back then.
Hopefully.
Anywho.
They also had Gatling guns.
Oh. The Spanish, you mean, or both sides?
No, the Americans had the Gatling guns. So that was critical to the success of the assault. So Cervera decided to escape Santiago 2 days later.
You know, you said 11,000 troops, right? That's a huge amount of American military strength. And I think you said 1,200 Spanish troops. I mean, that's amazing that they were able to fend them off for as long as they had, especially since the Americans had the Gatling guns. That's impressive.
Well, they're also attacking an entrenched position.
Right, with a frontal assault.
Yes.
Which isn't great.
No. That is very grindy.
That's a good word.
Yeah. Again, this is when tactics were changing. The Spaniards had a better rifle, which put out a better rate of fire.
Right.
Except for the Gatling gun. So, they're able to fend off from an entrenched, concealed location while the Americans were charging.
Yeah, in the open. That seems, yeah. Looking backwards, it seems idiotic. But
oh, it was. Even during this time.
Well, there you have it, folks.
Tactics are changing, and this is one of the examples of when, more modern tactics were used against more ancient tactics.
Right. That's true. And it proved effective.
Yeah. So after these battles, the American advance halted. Spanish troops successfully defended Fort Cansoa, which allowed them to stabilize their line and not allow the Americans to enter Santiago. So the Americans and Cubans started a bloody siege of the city. Because this is still when we're doing siege warfare.
Yeah.
During the night, Cuban troops dug a series of trenches towards the Spanish positions, and once they were done, they were occupied by U.S. soldiers. A new set of trenches went forward. Now, American troops, they did suffer daily losses from Spanish fire, but they suffered a lot more casualties from heat exhaustion and mosquito diseases.
That's
normal for trench warfare, or for siege warfare.
Especially in this climate.
But during
Amazing.
a siege, the most deaths that happen are disease.
I guess I didn't think about that. That makes sense.
Yeah, because in the besieged area, you've got no supplies coming in, so not only do you have starvation, but you also have all of your waste piling up.
Oh, that's right.
Which does disease, especially when you're so tight together, because everybody is now in this little itty bitty area. But on the outside, you do have all your supplies, but you still have all these people crammed into a little itty bitty area. And whenever that happens, disease follows.
Yep. You know, it's really something that modern troops don't really have to think about. Or I guess they've thought about it in a way that it has prevented that kind of casualty rate. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. All right. So let's go over to the naval operations. So the major port of Santiago de Cuba was the main target of naval operations. The U.S. fleet attacking Santiago needed shelter from the hurricane season. So they chose Guantanamo Bay because it has a very, very good harbor.
Huh.
So this was the 1898 invasion of Guantanamo Bay, June 6th, and this was the first U.S. naval attack and successful landing of U.S. Marines with naval support.
Wow.
The Battle of Santiago de Cuba on July 3rd was the largest naval engagement of the Spanish-American War and resulted in the destruction of the Spanish Caribbean Squadron. In May, the fleet of Spanish Admiral Pascal Cervera Topti, he's dead, he can't get mad at me, had been spotted by American forces in Santiago Harbor, where they had taken shelter from protection from sea attack. A 2-month standoff followed.
Wow.
When the Spanish squadron finally tried to leave the harbor on July 3rd, the American forces destroyed or grounded 5 of the 6 ships.
That's impressive.
Yeah, only one vessel, the armored cruiser Cristobal Colon, survived. But her captain hauled down her flag and then scuttled her when the Americans caught up to her.
So that's 6 out of 6. Good job, Americans.
The Americans captured 1,612 Spanish sailors.
Wow.
Including the admiral. Yeah. They were sent to Seaveys Island in Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they were confined at Camp Long as POWs from July 11th until mid-September. During this standoff, the U.S. Assistant Naval Constructor Richmond Pearson Hobson, what a name, good old RPH, had been ordered by Rear Admiral William T. Sampson to sink the USS Merrimack in the harbor to bottle up the Spanish fleet.
Don't they know that's a museum piece?
Well, it is now because the mission was a failure,
Okay.
and Hobson and his crew were captured. They were exchanged on July 6th, and Hobson became a national hero and received the Medal of Honor, and then in 1933 became a congressman.
Well, how about that?
Mm-hmm. So, hit. And it
Oh boy.
quickly spread among the American forces, which crippled it. A group of officers chose Theodore Roosevelt to draft a request to Washington to withdraw the army. And at the same time, General Shafter also produced a similar request. He described his forces as an army of convalescents.
Oh.
By the time of his letter, 75% of the force in Cuba was unfit for service.
Golly.
So on August 7th, the Americans started leaving. Now, not everybody left. The Army kept the Black 9th Infantry Regiment in Cuba to support the occupation. The logic was that their race and the fact that many black volunteers came from southern states would protect them. It was racism.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was a rationalization. So if 75% of all forces were unfit for service, I am curious, you said the 4 colored regiments were there.
Mm-hmm.
Did they have the same casualty rate? Because that data may have supported this theory, even though the theory may not be correct. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, when they left, 73 of their 984 strength were sick.
73 out of 984? That's less than 10%. That's not too bad relative to the other 75% being out of service.
Right.
So there may be something going on there. I don't know. Because I was thinking the locals, like if you live in Cuba and you've lived there long enough, are you as affected by yellow fever?
Natural immunity?
Something like that. Or, I don't know. And so I'm not informed enough to hypothesize on why that's the case.
Well, at a guess, probably because they knew better how to keep
avoid
the mosquitoes off of you.
Yeah.
They knew how to use mosquito netting, things of that nature, while the Americans did not.
That's true. I imagine if you're any troop from the South, you probably have dealt with a lot of mosquitoes and may have some kind of method of preventing that just by happenstance.
Right. I'm sure that had something to do with it. But yellow fever wasn't prevalent in the U.S. as it was in the tropics.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we're going to get all our sick guys home. You guys, yeah, I know we've been really crappy to you for a long time, but why don't you go ahead and hold this for us? Thanks.
And we're going to nickname you guys Immunes as well.
That's right. Hey, that's a good thing, right?
They actually did nickname them the Immunes.
Really?
Yes.
That's kind of cool. If I was in the Immunes, I would accept that nickname proudly. But that's just me.
Especially with the racial slurs that they would have used instead.
That's true.
I'll take it too.
That's a step up.
Yeah. All right, let's go jump over to Puerto Rico. In May of 1898, Lieutenant Henry H. Whitney of the U.S.'s 4th Artillery was sent to Puerto Rico on a recon mission, ordered by the Army's Bureau of Military Intelligence. He provided maps and information on the Spanish military forces to the U.S. government prior to the invasion. The offensive began on May 12, 1898, when a squadron of 12 U.S. ships commanded by Rear Admiral William T. Sampson attacked the capital, San Juan. They did not inflict much damage, but they were able to establish a blockade on the harbor. So on June 22nd, the cruiser Isabel II and the destroyer Terror delivered a Spanish counterattack, but were not able to break the blockade, and the Terror was damaged. So after that, a land offensive began on July 25th. 1,300 soldiers led by Nelson A. Miles disembarked on the coast of Guanea. This is what became known as the Battle of Yac. This was followed by the Battle of Fajardo, where the U.S. was able to seize control of it on August 1st, but were then forced to withdraw on the 5th after a group of 200 Puerto Rican Spanish soldiers gained control of the city.
Huh.
Most of the civilians, though, they evacuated to a lighthouse.
Really?
Yeah. Maybe going up to the top of it and just watching everything that was happening below them.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
That's a big lighthouse, or not a lot of civilians. But also, that's probably an infrastructure thing that nobody would think to aim at or destroy. Like, everybody uses the lighthouse, you know?
Yeah, everybody uses the lighthouse. And I don't have any idea how big this city was at the time. More than likely, it's bigger now.
Yeah.
So looking it up now wouldn't do as much good.
Right. I do think that's not a bad idea. Whoever came up with going to the lighthouse, that's probably one of the safer, especially if there's a naval engagement. They're not going to most likely target that.
I wouldn't think they would. So the Americans encountered a larger opposition during the Battle of Guam as they advanced towards the island's interior. They engaged in crossfires in the Guamani River Bridge and Camo, also the Battle of Silva Heights and the Battle of Azomonte. These battles were all inconclusive, and the Allied soldiers retreated.
I want to pipe in here. This is not the first time you've mentioned our forces were not super effective. In learning this in middle school, high school, the way it's taught is very brief, and it's basically like we rolled over the Spanish. And that was kind of it. I was like, oh, I guess we did a great job. But when you get into the details like you're getting into, it paints a better picture. You know what I mean? And so I'm appreciating this.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
On August 9th, American troops were pursuing units retreating from Camo, and they found heavy resistance in Abioncio, in a mountain known as Curo Gervasio del Amonte. And they retreated after they had 6 wounded. They were not gone for good. They came back 3 days later with artillery and started a surprise attack. There was a crossfire, and confused soldiers reported seeing Spanish reinforcements nearby, and 5 American officers were injured, which prompted them to retreat. All military actions in Puerto Rico were suspended on August 13th after U.S. President William McKinley and French Ambassador Jules Cambronne, who acted on behalf of the Spanish government, signed an armistice, said that Spain will relinquish its sovereignty over Puerto Rico.
Well, all right. So was that, when you say armistice, is that of the entire Spanish-American War, or just this conflict with Puerto Rico that you're just most recently talking about? Does that make sense?
It is not the end of the war. An armistice is when you say, okay, we're going to stop fighting while we talk. It's more than a ceasefire, but less than a peace treaty.
That's a great way to put it. I'm on board now.
Okay. All right, so with the defeats in Cuba and the Philippines, and both of its fleets incapacitated, Spain sued for peace, and negotiations opened. Hostilities were officially ended on August 12th, 1898, with the signing in Washington of a protocol of peace between the United States and Spain. After 2 months of negotiations, The formal peace treaty, the Treaty of Paris, was signed in Paris, imagine that, on December 10th of 1898, and was ratified by the U.S. Senate on February 6th.
I wish treaties that were signed in Paris came with some better differentiation, because there are so many treaties of Paris. And so, I don't know, that's just a personal nit of mine. But here we are, another Treaty of Paris.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we drank every time there's a Treaty of Paris, we might be plastered. I'm just saying.
The first one being in 1229, which ended the Albigensian Crusade. The last one being in 2015, which was an international agreement on climate change.
Oh, that's right. The Paris Accords.
The Paris Agreement, which is a treaty.
Yeah,
it's still a Treaty of Paris.
See how confusing it is? It's like, do you support the Paris Treaty? Well, which one?
I mean, there was 5 different ones just for World War I.
That's nuts. That's nuts. So anyway.
Not at all.
Spanish sue for peace. Treaty of Paris. They relinquish control.
So the U.S. gained all of Spain's colonies outside of Africa in the treaty.
Wow.
Including the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico.
I would imagine, because...
It came into force in Cuba on April 11th, 1899.
Wow.
With the Cubans only being observers.
Well...
Formed its own civil government and gained independence on May 20th, 1902.
That's pretty fast afterwards.
But the U.S. did impose various restrictions on the new government, including prohibiting alliances with other countries, and reserved the right to intervene. And this is also when they established their lease of Guantanamo Bay, where they're like paying $1 a year or some crap.
That's a pretty good investment.
Yeah, I don't think it was much more of an investment than this is what's going to happen.
Right.
You're going to like it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to be diplomatic, Dale, like the governor of Guam was.
So, were you counting? Did you know how long the war actually lasted?
It looks like it was less than a year, so let's talk about months. Ended in August. I don't remember when it started, but it was all in 1898. I do know that. I was so wrapped up in the details. It was so exciting. You're such a great storyteller. How could I remember that? Let's say 5 months.
10 weeks.
10 weeks!
Half months.
So, of this war, I want to go ahead and interject why I was interested in this war. The federal excise tax on telephones was introduced in 1898 to help pay for this war, because this was before the income tax. And they're like, how are we going to pay for all these ships and troops and all this stuff? So they're like, oh, we'll just put a luxury tax on those new telephones that the rich folks have. And it stuck around for a while. And it went away, but it would come back, and went away, would come back. And I remember looking at my phone bill, looking at federal excise tax, and it went away like in this millennium, like in the 2000s. So this is over 100 years of the government paying for the Spanish-American War, supposedly. I'm doing finger quotes for the listener. And it bothers me, that's all.
It bothers you that you were paying for a war that ended before you were born?
A 10-week war. I think it's been paid for.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Inflation
I guess creative
rates.
accounting. Yeah, that's true. Who knows? You still got to pay for Guantanamo Bay, so,
Yeah. A guy named John Hay, who was the U.S. ambassador to the UK, wrote Theodore Roosevelt and declared that it had been, quote, a splendid little war.
Huh. He didn't get yellow fever, I imagine.
Maybe not. The press showed Northerners and Southerners, blacks and whites, fighting against a common foe. And this helped to ease the scars left over from the American Civil War.
That's interesting. I think that uniting influences like this are helpful. It's a pity that it was a war which ended lives. but it's good to have a common goal. I think
Yeah.
that's something that's missing a lot of times in life.
It helped heal wounds.
That's great.
Yeah. This war also marked America's entry into world affairs.
That's right.
This is when the U.S. entered a long and prosperous period of economic and population growth and technological innovation that lasted through the 1920s.
That's impressive.
Mm-hmm. This war also reduced the Spanish Empire.
Oh, yeah.
Spain had been declining as an imperial power since the early 19th century as a result of Napoleon's invasion.
Ah.
And so the loss of Cuba caused a national trauma because of the affinity of the peninsular Spaniards had with Cuba. Remember, this was seen as a province of Spain rather than just as a colony.
Right.
So the Spanish only had a handful of overseas holdings after this. The Spanish West Africa, the Spanish Guinea, Spanish Morocco, and the Canary Islands.
Yeah, that's... they had most of the Western Hemisphere at one point, and they've fallen quite a bit.
There was a Spanish soldier, a guy named Julio Cervera Bavaria, who served in the Puerto Rican campaign. He published a pamphlet in which he blamed the natives of that colony for its occupation by the Americans. Quote, "I have never seen such a servile, ungrateful country," i.e. Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
In 24 hours, the people of Puerto Rico went from being fervently Spanish to enthusiastically American. They humiliated themselves, giving in to the invader as the slave bows to the powerful lord. He was then challenged to a duel by a group of young Puerto Ricans.
Can you have a group duel like that? What's the deal?
I'm sure every one of them
Oh, I see.
challenged them to a duel, and he would have to duel them one at a time.
That's... Well, those are the rules. That's
if you
right.
don't kill him, they will kill him. Or we'll just keep going down the line until somebody kills them.
That's a lot of duels. And rifling had been developed by this point, so it's going to be trickier. I guess they could do sabers. Anyway, so what happened?
You know what? I'm looking that up now. I want to know what happened too. Okay, so the group challenged him to a duel if he did not retract his pamphlet. And they drew lots for this honor.
Ah, okay.
The duel never took place because Cervera explained his intentions in writing the pamphlet, and all parties were satisfied. So, in other words, he talked his way out of it.
Man, that's a diplomat right there.
Roosevelt, of course, returned to the U.S. as a war hero, and that started his political career to become a future president of the United States.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. So, that's pretty much it. A lot of political stuff, but this isn't a political podcast, so we'll go ahead and just pass through that. Next time, because looking at the time, we're going to get into some of the battles of this war. We have 5 battles to talk about.
Nice. That's pretty good for a 10-week conflict.
Yeah. And that's just the sea battles.
Yeah, we don't need land battles. Let the Army podcast talk about that.
Exactly. So, I need to find a new hero. I believe we have talked about him. We've talked about him. All right, so at the end of all our episodes, we like to honor one of our fallen angels. And today we're going to honor a guy named Captain Nicholas. His hometown was Pennsylvania. He served in the U.S. Navy Continental. He served on the Randolph. His date of sacrifice was March 7th, 1778. Killed in action in the Caribbean Sea off the island of Barbados. He was 27. Nicholas Biddle was born into a desperate situation on September 10th, 1750, but he would rise to fame quickly, with a reputation for uncommon courage in the American colonies that were becoming a new nation. Born to a prominent family with 9 children in Philadelphia, their future took a turn for the worse when Biddle's father, William Biddle III, failed at business and lost the family fortune.
Ooh.
After William died, Nicholas's mother, Mary Biddle, was forced to leave home to work in her father's profession as a surveyor. The older children scrambled to earn income for the family, and by the time Nicholas was 14 years old, he signed on with 2 massive merchant vessels as a shipboy, attending to the needs of the officers on their trade voyage to the West Indies. According to the U.S. Naval Institute, his first voyage exposed him to every aspect of a sailor's lot. Pleasant days of progress mixed with gales and terrific storms. Idyllic islands fraught with blackguards and thieves. With pluck and ambition, he earned a mate's rank, surviving a shipwreck for good measure. At 20, he had grown to 5 feet 9 inches, handsome and unassuming, as long as he was not crossed. With the American colonies under the rule of the British Crown, Biddle joined the Royal Navy in 1770 as a midshipman. Rumors of war between England and Spain over control of the Falkland Islands, east of the southern tip of South America, drew young Nicholas Biddle with the promise of adventure. A different adventure took him in the opposite direction. When in the service of the king, Biddle volunteered for an expedition to try how far navigation was practical towards the North Pole. Another ambitious teen on the ship was Horatio Nelson.
Whoa.
I know you've heard that name before.
Yes.
Who would later, as Admiral Nelson, Lord Nelson, be regarded as the greatest officer in the history of the Royal Navy. When the expedition returned to England, Biddle expected to join a similar discovery expedition to the Southern Ocean with naturalist Sir Joseph Banks. Before Biddle could join the voyage, word of the Boston Massacre reached him in England. Years of anger towards British exploitation of its American colonies was sparked into full rebellion. He resigned his Royal Navy position and sailed for home, immediately joining the cause of freedom from British rule. Biddle sailed 2 massive merchant ships to Santo Domingo, disguised as a trade vessel, bringing molasses to the colonies. Instead of molasses, the ship's hold was filled with half barrels of gunpowder. On the return trip, a Delaware River pilot warned Biddle of a British warship ahead that was stopping American vessels and seizing smuggled contraband. In a bold and clever mood, Biddle raised a French flag up the mast, sailed past the British ship without detection, and docked with his cargo in Philadelphia. A new Continental Navy was established on October 13, 1775, by the Continental Congress. Biddle was offered a commission as a captain along with 4 others, the first 5 captains in the American naval history. Biddle was given command of the 14-gun Andrea Doria, a merchant ship being outfitted for war. Eager to join the fray, Biddle and his new crew had to wait as ice prevented them from going to sea. As the initial enthusiasm for action turned into weeks of waiting, some of the crew jumped ship and ended up in a Lewes, Delaware jail. The U.S. Naval Institute describes Biddle's reaction. Their leader was William Greene, a hulking malcontent who convinced the others to overcome their guards. Barring the door and arming themselves, the jail became their fortress. Biddle sent a detachment of Marines ashore to retrieve them. When they returned empty-handed, he decided to quell the mutiny himself, and found the jail surrounded by timid militiamen and curious townfolk. "Oh, damn," Biddle swore, and ordered the door broken down. He crossed the jail's threshold to find the muzzle of Greene's musket pointing right at him. Holding a cocked pistol in one hand, Biddle calmly said, "Now, Greene, if you do not take good aim, you are a dead man." Greene dropped his weapon. Word of Biddle's bravado leapt from ship to ship. He was a captain not to be trifled with. Andrea Doria spent the following months at sea, engaging and defeating British ships off American shores. Congressman Stephen Hopkins of Rhode Island ordered Biddle and Andrea Doria to sail forth and annoy the enemy. Biddle did just that, seizing prize after prize for the British along the American coast. News of Biddle's bravado and success spread throughout the young Continental Navy. In a letter to his brother, Charles Biddle concluded with, "I fear nothing but what I ought to fear." Captain Biddle left his command of Andrea Doria when, on June 6, 1776, he was selected to command the 32-gun Randolph, one of 4 new frigates built in Philadelphia for the Continental Navy. After a difficult start, including Randolph's mast being struck by lightning 3 times in the same storm, Biddle's command was marked by success after stunning success. Biddle's fame grew as news of his successes spread across the colonies. His victories also had the attention of the Royal Navy. As he searched for enemy ships in the Atlantic, the British were also hoping for a confrontation and bringing superior firepower. On March 7, 1778, the confrontation took place in the Caribbean Sea off the island of Barbados. The 32-gun Randolph encountered the British 64-gun HMS Yarmouth. In the ensuing battle, the leadership of Captain Biddle and the skill of the men aboard Randolph shocked the crew of the Yarmouth. Despite this disparity of firepower, eyewitness reported that Randolph's gunners fired 4 broadsides to Yarmouth's 1. The fight was only minutes old, and Yarmouth's rigging and sails were already shot to pieces. Her bowsprit and mizzen topmast useless from American round shot. Biddle was wounded in the thigh, but with Randolph seemingly on the verge of another stunning victory, he inspired his men and refused to be brought below decks. Then, 20 minutes into the battle, something unknown, perhaps a random spark, ignited Randolph's magazine, and in one sudden, blinding flash, the ship disintegrated. All but 4 of the 305 aboard Randolph were lost, including Captain Biddle. The loss of the Randolph and of the famed Captain Biddle were a crushing blow to the tiny Continental Navy and the hopes of the colonists. The courage and skill of Nicholas Biddle would live on in American naval lore for centuries to come. Over time, the United States Navy would name 4 ships USS Biddle in his honor. So, Captain Nicholas Biddle, we thank you.
Thank you.
And actually, if you want to know more about this battle, we have covered it. All right, so XO, take us out.
All right, no problem. So thank you very much again, listeners, for joining us today. It's always cool to learn more about history, the Navy, and what America was up to a long time ago. If you ever want to correct us on what the citizens of Guam are called, for example, or if you have any questions that you have or any ideas that you'd like us to explore, there's a couple of ways you can contact us. You can email us at usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We're on X or Twitter, whichever you want to call it. We're open.
X-Twitter.
X-Twitter. There we are. At USNHistoryPod. It's in the show notes. Go ahead and, oh man, just check the show notes. It's right there. In the show notes, you'll also find a Discord server where we are, and we talk, we ask questions. We invite you to ask questions of us, or say, hey, I saw this ship, it was awesome, or whatever floats your boat, no pun intended. And then we're on YouTube. We are on your favorite podcast app, which you probably already know because you're listening to this. And we also have a subscriber option if you would like to help support us. We invite you to do so, and subscribers get a nice little peek into some extra content. So I think that's it. Oh, yeah, don't forget to rate us. That helps us quite a bit. So rate us.
And with that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.